Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation. Thanks a lot for the introduction. So I'm going to talk about some of the risks that are connected to the development to this Gutenberg moment. I don't think I'm one of the monks, but I think we should also keep in mind what should I say, a wider perspective. So we should put this moment where we are into a wider perspective. And I think autonomy is a very important feature in order to do so. So autonomy is a central human ability. So if you wouldn't be autonomous persons, then you wouldn't be able to make your own decisions. And if you wouldn't be able to own your own decisions, then you most likely wouldn't have ended up coming here today. So it seems to be something very important. And if we look at the development of the last 200 or 300 years, then it's obvious that autonomy has gained importance in modern age. It's essential for today's sociality, and I think it's at risk. And I think that certain developments of the digital media contribute to this risk. I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that digital media are bad, not at all. I'm using them myself, obviously. But I would like to point to certain problems and also would make some suggestions how to respond to these problems. So let's first talk about what autonomy is, then I will say a few words about the historical development, then I will say a bit about the risks, and then about the responses. So let's first say, what is autonomy? What does it mean? Well, autonomy is something, an individual ability, something that you are able to do or are not able to do. And it means that you're able to act according to your own principles. That is, to the things you believe, that you desire, and you think are good. And you're able to do so even if there is some resistance. So in order to illustrate this, there are famous examples in the history, Antigone, for instance, Martin Luther, or Hans and Sophie Scholl. When you are in Munich, I mean, that's maybe the best example here. How did it develop? Well, or what does it mean that autonomy developed? Well, the most important steps in the development of autonomy were in the Age of Enlightenment. Kant was an important figure there. And it means basically that responsibility moves from the social to the individual level. It means that not your family or the group you are living in make the decisions for you, or the gender that you happen to have, but you yourself are on the driver's seat. So if you choose your partner, if you choose a job, or if you choose your education. It means that includes increasing freedom, and it also includes increasing social efficiency. So for the society you're in, so it wouldn't make very much sense if, as it was usual 200 years ago, you would just take the job of your father or your mother. Because then you would end up most likely in a position that wouldn't be very suitable for your specific abilities. It's much better for the society if you make the decision yourself. Well, as I already said, the most important steps were made during the Age of Enlightenment 200 years ago, but also during the 20th century. And in order to illustrate this, look at these pictures from a German gymnasium from the Abiturs. That's the final class in the German gymnasium when you finish. So that's a picture. I could have shown a picture of 1950. It would have looked exactly similar. This is from 1962. The next one is from 1963. Nothing has changed. Only males, most of them just standing in this way, wearing a black suit, a tie, a white tie, and a cap. And that's what you see from 1950 until 1963, 1967. Again, everything. Then something changes. We are in 1969, so they are not wearing these caps anymore, and some of them are wearing a bow tie. You see this? And they're doing so because the teacher does this. But now the changes come. Now we have not these dark suits anymore, and then the suits, there are no suits anymore, and that happens during a few years, and then the posture changes. We have female, and this happens during 5 years, has stayed completely identical over 20 years, and then you have a dramatic change in 5 years. And I'm not talking about wearing suits or not wearing suits. So that's just a symbol for a process of individualization that has started in German society a bit later than in most other Western societies, but has deeply affected gender roles, the possibility of making choices in your job and in partnership. So, and that is what I mean by increasing autonomy. Now, what I would like to show now is that autonomy is at risk. Why can we say so? Well, if we take our normal perspectives, then we would say, well, it has developed over 200 or 300 years. So this was a long and a steady development. So autonomy seems to be something stable. But if we take a wider perspective, the perspective of mankind, and that is the perspective of mankind, not mankind entirely. I just left out the Stone Age. So it's only the history of Homo sapiens, 200,000 years. Then the period between the end of the Enlightenment and today is 0.1% of the human history. That's the development of autonomy. So it's only this small tip. Yeah, and if I would have included the Stone Age, then the era would start something over there. So we are in an extremely unlikely situation, something that has developed very, very quickly. And that means that there is no guarantee for development or for the further existence of this specific situation, particularly this high degree of autonomy. So the risks count. And what are those risks? There are threats to autonomy coming from the developments in digital media, and I will present them in 2 case studies. First, feedback mechanisms in social media and monopolies of internet companies. So in order to understand what happens in the social media, a piece of social psychology is in place. So social psychologists try to understand social mechanisms, particularly after the Second World War. So many of the social psychologists in the US were Jewish, and they tried to understand that many of them came from Germany, and they tried to understand what happened in Germany and what happened in general if a group has influence or takes control over what individuals do. And what they found out is that in many cases, this influence is beyond an individual's control. So they did a lot of experiments. I would like to show you only one. You might have heard about the Milgram's experiment that goes with electric shocks that individuals do. But I'm talking about something much more simple. That's the so-called conformity experiment by Solomon Asch. And what you are expected to do, so you get a reference line, and then you have a very simple task. You just have to tell which of those comparison lines is the right one. It's this one, obviously. And under normal conditions, 99% of the responses are correct. So far, so good. Now, the experiment was a bit different. If you would have been a subject in the experiment, you would have entered a room with 5 or 7 people already sitting there, and you would think that they would be subjects like yourself. In reality, there were confederates, that is, there were employees of the experimenter, and they were supposed to give specific answers. In some cases, they all gave the wrong answer. So they all said, well, the correct line is this one here. And in these cases, you would give the wrong answer with a probability of 40%. Almost half of the subjects gave a completely wrong answer and an obviously wrong answer. Yeah? So that shows how strong the influence of group behavior is without any pressure. And now there were studies by brain imaging, and it has turned out that the influence is not only on your judgment. So you are talking to yourself, well, all these guys give this answer. I think it's wrong, but maybe they are right. No, it has an influence on how you perceive those lines. So it's a very deep down influence that evades your control. And that's the point that I would like to make. And that's also something that follows from all the other experiments in social psychology. So the influence of a group on our behavior is in many cases beyond our control. That's the point that I would like to make. And that's even more so if there is a feedback mechanism in the group. So I mean, what the other members of the group do change your behavior. So you will give this answer. Now, your change of the behavior will have an impact on the other members of the group as well. So there is another shift in the behavior. That will change the standards of the group again, and that leads to a fundamental shift, or may lead to a fundamental shift in group behavior. So that's what we see a continuous shift of group standards, and that's something that can explain, for instance, war crimes or certain behavior in the military that we've seen in Germany, but also in other wars, that groups do things that no individual would do for themselves. Now, so far, and that's now I'm coming back to why I think that there's a risk in social media, the constraints were so far, these developments were so far constrained to real groups existing at a real time, at a real place, people really getting together. But the social media development in the social media have transferred those feedback mechanisms to ad hoc virtual groups, Facebook groups, comments on news website, and these developments unfold on a random basis, on the basis of stereotypes, and among the consequences are shitstorms or kind of mass delusions. And I would like to present you with two examples. But first I would like to show why this interferes or compromises your autonomy. It compromises, so if you are a member of these groups and are affected by this feedback mechanism, of course your autonomy is affected, so you are going to do things, you are not going to act according to your own standards anymore, you are going to act according to the group standards. So it affects your own autonomy. But what's even worse is if you are a victim of these shitstorms or developments. So I will present you examples where the real punishment, which is regulated by very, very strong and sophisticated regulations in all the Western countries, the real punishment is now done outside the course. And certain legal warranties in our legal systems are undermined. So you have a right to a fair trial or to be innocent until proven guilty. But if you are a victim of these shitstorms, then you will be punished just at random. And take these two examples. For instance, I'm not sympathizing with Christian Wolff, but I think the process, how he was driven out of his office, is an example for these kind of group development. So he was allegedly bribed, as you might remember, by some members of the movie industry. Some of them were his friends, and that gave a tremendous echo in the classic and also in the social media. So this was a group process that involved everyone. I was upset as well. And among the bad things he did, was one call to the editor of the Bild-Zeitung, and the other bad thing he did was that he accepted a bobby car from a car seller, something that everybody would have done. So, and then he was driven out of office. Before any trial, before any proof of the evidence was made. When he was taken to trial, it turned out that the allegations were completely unsubstantial. But the punishment, the real punishment, had already taken place. And that's the point that I would like to make. There are social developments driven by those social media, by group processes in the social media that undermine your right to a fair trial and undermine those sophisticated processes that we have in the legal system that guarantees or tries to guarantee that you will only be convicted if you are proven guilty. So that's the point that I would like to make. And another case is the case of, again, a very tragic case. And don't get me wrong, I'm not defending the guy who has killed Tuce Albayrak. So, you may remember this case, at least those who come from Germany. There was a fight. Sanel M was fighting against a girl. He was attacking this girl, and Tuce stepped in. She was hit by Sanel and afterwards died. So, and the picture that was transported in the media upon absolutely superficial information was he was the villain, and she was the hero. Sanel M was called Tuce's killer, so that's one piece of the media. And this was, I'm now presenting evidence from the media, but you may remember this was a huge outcry in the social network as well. Well, when he was taken to trial, it turned out there was a mutual dispute from both sides, and Tuce's death was not directly caused by Sanel, but because she fell down. It was only indirectly caused by him. Now, but it has still severe consequences, and that's important because it was taken to the public. He has to change. He has to serve 3 years in prison, and then he will have to change his name and will have to leave Germany because it's not possible anymore to do a decent living here. So, and I think this is something that is unacceptable. You may think these are extreme cases. In some sense, they may be, but they show how these social media undermine certain standards of our society, and we have to try to keep those standards. Last point that I would like to make, balance of power. So balance of power is an essential point in democracies. That is, under those conditions that have enabled the rise of autonomy. And that's something you can see in Rome, in Venice, in Switzerland, Netherlands, all the old democracies. That is something that's absolutely essential. Now, the internet economies challenges this balance of powers. Monopolies grow on an accelerated and enhanced basis. So take, for instance, Toyota. It took them 70 years to get a value of $220 billion. The Bank of America, 84 years, and Procter & Gamble, 170 years. It took Facebook 3 years after getting into the stock market to achieve a similar value, and Google 2 years. And it's not only the financial power of financial monopoly, it's also, and that's more important, a monopoly of the processing of information, particularly in the case of Google. And that changes the relationship of power between a democratic state and those big companies. And that already has effects. I mean, think about the so-called systemically relevant banks in the financial crisis. Yeah, nothing, or only not very much could be done about it because there was so much power involved. And I think something similar may happen, and we have to think about it. I'm not predicting that it will happen, may happen with these big companies, and we already see a tendency in this direction. For instance, tax avoidance by those companies. So Google pays 2% of their overturn they have. It also in copyright issues are important, so they try to evade a German copyright law. So I think this is something where something needs to be done about. Now, what could be done? Well, again, I'm not proposing pessimism. I'm not saying that these things will happen. I'm saying that we have to find new rules in order to deal with this Gutenberg moment. Now, if we look back to the 17th century, where autonomy was established, well, it was established based on the understanding of the underlying activity, underlying mechanisms, social mechanisms. So they tried to understand those social mechanisms and then established certain rules, and many of them were based on individual activity of writers like Montesquieu or Hobbes, Rousseau or Kant. Now the conditions have changed, so what we need are new rules. And I think we should use our autonomy, and we should use the digital media in order to defend autonomy, to defend or establish new rules. So what is required is an understanding of the social mechanisms, the subconscious mechanisms that affect the way we deal and we decide in groups, in social media groups. And there is a lot of research being done on that may help to improve our action. And we have to establish rules. We don't have to appeal to the state. We have to establish those rules ourselves that can save autonomy based on these findings of social psychology. So thank you very much.